On my son's 29th birthday, I stood outside his house with a chocolate cake in one hand and a box holding a family heirloom in the other, a gold watch passed down from his grandfather. I'd baked his favorite cake from scratch, piped his name on it, and wrapped the gift with trembling fingers and too much hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, this year he'd see me. Instead, through the window, I heard him laugh with his friends. "Honestly," he said, "the best gift my mom could give me is to disappear from my life forever." I didn't cry. I didn't knock. I didn't shout. I walked away without saying a word. An hour later, flashing red and blue lights lit up the yard, and 2 police cruisers pulled up. My son didn't see it coming, but I did, because this time, I didn't just leave. I left with everything. The cake wobbled slightly in Evelyn's grip as she stepped down from the porch. It wasn't just a cake. It was the chocolate layer cake Nathan had loved since he was 5. The frosting was fresh, thick, swirled with care, and the piping across the top read, "Happy 29th, Nathan." She had even found those special gold-dusted candles online. They were waiting in her purse along with a small velvet box. Inside, a gold pocket watch, slightly worn around the edges, still ticking after 5 decades. It had belonged to her father, then her husband, and now, she hoped, it would belong to her son. Evelyn Hale was 68, and every bone in her body carried the quiet ache of years spent bending, not breaking, for her only child. Since her husband died when Nathan was 6, she'd raised him alone, working 3 jobs at one point, cutting corners and giving up her own dreams. Today was not just his birthday. It was her silent hope that their bond could still be mended. The April sun poured warm, honey-colored light across the neighborhood. The soft hum of lawnmowers, bird song, and the faint crackle of laughter drifted from Nathan's backyard. Through the side gate, she caught sight of a small crowd. Nathan, tall and laughing, holding a beer. His friends, faces she'd seen over the years but never really met, and Lily, his ex, sitting on a patio chair, watching the scene unfold with unreadable eyes. Evelyn hesitated at the sliding door, balancing the cake and gift carefully, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. She didn't want to interrupt. She just wanted to surprise him. Maybe make him smile like he used to when he was little and came running at the smell of chocolate. But then, voices. "You really went all out, huh?" Tanner's voice rang clear. "Catering, music system, bar setup. Damn." Nathan chuckled. "Gotta keep up appearances." Evelyn leaned in slightly, not eavesdropping, just waiting for the right moment. Tanner added, "Man, your mom must have dropped a fortune. She's always spoiling you." Nathan's voice changed. Cooler, dismissive. "Please, that's not love, that's guilt. She's been buying my affection for years, thinks she can erase the past with gifts." Evelyn's smile faltered. Derek chimed in. "At least she shows up, dude. My parents barely remember my birthday." Nathan snorted. "Yeah, well, I wish mine wouldn't. Honestly, the best gift she could give me is to disappear from my life forever." The laughter that followed felt like glass breaking inside her. Evelyn didn't move. The cake in her hands trembled slightly, and her grip tightened around the box beneath her arm. The frosting smudged under her thumb. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the rest of the conversation. Time slowed. Words became muffled. Light shifted. She'd imagined him surprised when he saw the cake, maybe touched. Maybe he'd hug her. Instead, those words hung in the air like a final sentence. She turned around without a sound, retreating quietly down the steps, past the tulips she'd planted years ago during one of his middle school projects. The laughter behind her faded with every step she took. By the time she reached her car, the cake was still in her hands, untouched. Her fingers trembled as she set it on the passenger seat, the velvet box she placed gently on her lap. Evelyn exhaled, long and slow, like someone deflating. In the silence of her parked car, the truth pressed down like a weight she'd carried too long. She'd come today not just to celebrate, but to be seen, to be appreciated, to be remembered for more than just the money she'd spent or the favors she'd done. But Nathan had made himself clear. She pulled away from the curb with no final glance back, her foot heavy on the gas, her eyes dry but burning. Evelyn didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Her whole body was too numb to mourn something that had been unraveling for years. What hurt wasn't the insult. It was how easily it had come, and how honest it had sounded. Evelyn parked in the quiet lot behind her apartment building. The sun had dipped lower, casting long amber shadows across the cracked pavement. She stepped out slowly, carefully lifting the cake and velvet box, now both heavier than they had been that morning. She walked up the 2 flights of stairs, her knees aching slightly more than usual. Her body moved on instinct, but her mind was somewhere else. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and lavender. Comforting things, safe things. She set the cake gently on the kitchen table, staring at the now smudged words across the top. Happy 29th, Nathan. The frosting had slid slightly, the name nearly unreadable now. She didn't bother fixing it. The velvet box sat unopened beside it. She lowered herself into the chair by the window, the late afternoon light spilling in, warm and golden. She placed her palms on her lap, interlocked her fingers, and stared out at the empty parking lot. Her lips curled slightly upward, out of habit. She was smiling, but only her face knew. The rest of her body slumped forward like someone had cut its strings. Then she let go. The sob didn't come as a dramatic cry. It slipped out like breath, like grief that had waited its turn patiently. Her shoulders trembled, then stilled. Her eyes closed, and her smile faded, leaving only silence. 20 minutes passed before she stood again. She moved to the small cabinet by the hallway, pulling out a shoebox labeled Nathan, keepsakes. Inside were drawings, old report cards, handmade Mother's Day cards with scribbled hearts and crayon flowers. At the bottom, an envelope. Inside it, a receipt from the jewelry cleaner dated 2 months ago for a gold pocket watch. She'd had it restored for him, but the velvet box she'd taken to the party was not the same one from the shop. Her breath caught. Something didn't feel right. She reached into the side drawer of her desk and retrieved her bank statement folder. Evelyn wasn't a suspicious person, but years of single motherhood had made her careful. She flipped through the statements until she found one with a large withdrawal from a high-end electronics store, dated a few days before Nathan's party. Her stomach dropped. The total matched the cost of a premium surround sound system, and the signature next to the purchase was hers, except she hadn't been there. She stared at the folder, then at the velvet box. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was the same model of watch, but not the same watch. It was newer, shinier, cheaper. The original was gone, her father's watch, the one her husband had carried until the day he died, the one she'd cleaned, restored, and wrapped with trembling fingers. Sold. She closed the box, her fingers tightening around it. Her pulse quickened, but not from rage, from clarity. Nathan hadn't just rejected her emotionally, he had sold her legacy. The thing passed down from 2 generations, the object that represented memory, sacrifice, and meaning, had been traded for better party acoustics, for appearances, for noise. Evelyn walked back to the window and looked out again, this time seeing the sky burn into a deeper gold. Somewhere a siren echoed faintly in the distance, far and unimportant. She didn't weep this time. She thought instead about what would come next. She thought of the things she still owned, her name, her time, her peace. Things she had forgotten to protect while trying to preserve her role in someone else's story. Nathan had already written her out, and she was beginning to accept that maybe she didn't need to ask for a rewrite. She sat down with her notebook and wrote a single sentence. Tomorrow, I start packing. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic reveal, no call or message, just her, The sound of boxes opening, drawers emptying, and finally, the silence she would claim as her own. She looked back at the cake on the table. A soft, ironic smile curled at the corners of her mouth. Maybe she'd have a slice, maybe she wouldn't. But one thing was certain. She would never bake another one for him again. The soft shuffle of cardboard on tile was the only sound in Evelyn's apartment that morning. The clock read 4:42 a.m., the hour when the city was still asleep, when goodbyes could sneak out the back door without being noticed. She didn't need much. A suitcase with her clothes, a small box of photo albums, the shoe box of Nathan's keepsakes, now sealed shut with no intention of reopening, and a folder with her important documents. She left the cake behind on the counter, untouched. The velvet watch box, too. Let it all rot, she thought. Let it all mean nothing. Before she closed the door, she laid a single sheet of paper on the kitchen table, handwritten, unsigned. "Don't worry, I heard you. I'll give you the gift you wanted." No accusations, no explanations, just the closure he claimed to want. The drive out of the city was quiet. The highway was mostly empty, the world still wrapped in the gray hush of dawn. As the miles stretched behind her, Evelyn's chest loosened. Not quite peace, but something close. Her hands, once clenched on the wheel, began to relax. The tension in her neck softened. For the first time in years, she wasn't going anywhere for anyone else. The house waited at the edge of a forgotten road, an old single-story cottage with faded green shutters and a crooked porch light. It had once been her bakery, back before Nathan, back when she wore aprons covered in flour and laughed without worry about rent or responsibility. She'd sold the front to a neighbor years ago, but kept the back unit, storage space she never got around to clearing. Now, it would be hers again. She parked in the gravel lot and turned off the engine. The silence was different here. Not absence, but presence. A space waiting to be filled. Evelyn stepped out, the morning chill brushing against her arms, and fumbled for the keys in her coat pocket. She hadn't even made it to the porch before her phone buzzed. One new message from Janice, her neighbor back at the apartment. "Evelyn, are you okay? The police came to your place around 7 a.m. Something about a financial complaint. I told them you left early, but they looked serious. Call me." Evelyn froze. Her hands went cold even though the sun had begun to rise. Police? Financial complaint? She reread the message 3 times, each word sinking deeper than the last. She hadn't done anything. Had she? She unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting her things down quickly. The air was musty, full of dust and memory. She opened windows, then sat at the small wooden table by the back wall, the same table where she used to box cupcakes and count change. Her fingers moved fast, unlocking her laptop, logging into her online banking, then her email, then the cloud drive with all her scanned documents. There it was, her name, her signature. On 3 separate loan applications, each for thousands of dollars. She blinked, leaned closer. One was dated 4 months ago, one 6 weeks, one just last week. She'd signed none of them. And yet, there it was. Her full name, her social security number, her digital signature. Evelyn's heart pounded in her ears. Her hands trembled. She gripped the edge of the table like it might keep her grounded. Nathan. It had to be him. No one else had her documents. No one else had access to her files. She remembered now, months ago, he had come by asking for help with tax forms. He said he was applying for jobs, needed her W-2 from an old folder. She'd handed over the entire envelope without thinking. Trust was a reflex, and now it had turned into a weapon. She reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over Janice's name. Then she stopped. What would she say? What could she say? The police were involved. Her name was on those forms. Fraud or not, it was her reputation, her life on the line. Her first instinct was to call Nathan, demand answers, scream, cry, shake the truth out of him. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back in the wooden chair, the light through the dusty window now warm against her face. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. This, she realized, wasn't rock bottom. This was the floor beneath it. But at least it was solid. Evelyn didn't waste time with denial. The documents were too clear, the dates too recent, the digital trail too clean. Nathan hadn't just borrowed her name, he'd woven an entire paper trail of debt in it. 3 loans, 3 signatures, 3 lies, and $87,000 she hadn't asked for. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the possibility that she could be held responsible for the fraud or the chilling ease with which her son had done it. She sat at the kitchen table of the old bakery space, the late morning sun filtering through dust-streaked glass, her laptop open, her fingers stiff over the trackpad. Her tea had gone cold, her breath fogged slightly in the still air, and her spine felt like it had been hollowed out. For a long time, Evelyn stared at the screen. Then she reached for her phone and dialed. The law firm she called was one she remembered from her old life, back when she still had a storefront and contracts to review. They answered on the 3rd ring. "Langford and Bell," came the receptionist's voice. "How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with someone in financial crimes," Evelyn said, her voice calm, steady, almost unnervingly so. Preferably someone who doesn't waste time. Within an hour, she had a Zoom appointment. Within another 2, her scanned files were forwarded, her digital signature patterns uploaded, and her personal statements drafted. By the end of the day, she had a representative assigned to her case. Delilah Kim, a sharp-tongued, no-nonsense associate who didn't blink when Evelyn told her the suspect was her own son. "We're not here to judge families," Delilah said plainly. "We're here to protect what's left of yours." The investigation moved quickly. Nathan hadn't covered his tracks nearly as well as he thought. The IP addresses used to submit the online loan forms were linked to his home Wi-Fi. His computer, still registered under a shared account Evelyn had helped him set up years ago, was listed as the originating device. Even the digital signatures, while forged, followed a handwriting sample Evelyn had uploaded to her tax software 5 years prior, another favor for her son, who had needed help with his first freelance job. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a betrayal built on kindness. And then came the final twist of the knife. Delilah called Evelyn 2 days later with the bank's response. They had flagged one transaction as suspicious, not because it was fraudulent, but because of the purchase history that followed. "Do you know what he spent the money on?" Delilah asked, not unkindly. "No," Evelyn replied, though a cold pit had already begun to form in her gut. A portion of the funds, about $16,000, was wired to an electronics retailer, the same one that installed the sound system at his party. Evelyn said nothing. Delilah continued, her voice gentler now. "He also paid for event catering, imported decorations, a custom bar setup, and some luxury rental furniture. Your son's party, his 29th birthday, was funded with money he stole under your name." Evelyn didn't even blink. She sat there, quiet, breathing, staring out the window at the overgrown backyard of the bakery. The sounds of that day came back to her like ghosts. Nathan's laughter, the clink of bottles, the pop of party music, the warm glow of string lights, all of it now paid for by pieces of her stolen identity. She imagined him holding his beer, saying those words again. "The best gift she could give me is to disappear from my life forever." He had said it with ease, with confidence, because perhaps in his mind she had already served her purpose. The banker, the cook, the maid, the cheerleader, the silent vault of sacrifice. Now that vault had been cracked open and emptied, so what was left? Only the body that once held the love, only the silence she left behind. And maybe, Nathan thought, silence had no value, but he was wrong. The silence now was sharpened, powerful. Evelyn closed her laptop gently. She walked to the back door and stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the wind pushing through the tall grass, bending it like bowed heads in prayer. She stood there for a long moment, watching the sky turn, and then for the first time in days, she let herself feel everything. The pain, the humiliation, the incandescent rage. Her hands balled into fists, not to hit, but to hold in place all the pieces of her that threatened to fly apart. She thought of calling him, of driving back, of storming his house, dragging the speakers into the street, smashing every gift bought with her stolen future. But she wouldn't, because Nathan had already lost something more valuable than any of those things. He had lost her, not her presence, not her money, her belief in him. Her love was no longer blind, and without that, he had nothing worth stealing. Evelyn sat at the rickety kitchen table in the back of the old bakery, her pen hovering over an open notebook. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long golden beams across the worn floorboards. Dust floated lazily in the air, indifferent to the weight in her chest. She hadn't written in years, not like this. Not about Nathan. Most of her journaling had stopped after his high school graduation, when it seemed life had finally calmed, when she thought maybe, just maybe, she could stop surviving and start living. But now the words poured out of her like a dam breaking. May 5th. I covered his rent when he lost his first job. He said thank you, no apology. June 12th. Paid off the credit card debt he hid from me. He blamed the bank. October 3rd. I picked him up from the station. DUI, first time. I told myself he was just scared. January 18th. I mortgaged this building to cover the court fees. He said I didn't have to, but never said no. Page after page, year after year. Not just numbers and events, but emotions, her own humiliation, the excuses she had made on his behalf, the stories she told others to save face. It wasn't a list. It was a history of self-erasure. Each line, a sacrifice. Each paragraph, a wound. And through it all, one glaring omission. He had never once said he was sorry. Not truly. Not the way someone says it when they realize they've broken something that mattered. She put the pen down and stared at the page, her breath shallow. The truth was unbearable in its simplicity. She had given her life to a child who had grown into a man she didn't recognize, and who had never learned to see her as a person. Her phone buzzed on the table, a bank notification. She nearly ignored it, but the name caught her eye: Hawthorne Title and Escrow. Frowning, she opened it. A wire transfer request, pending. One Poindro authorization for a larger transaction. An internal memo note, final transfer scheduled, title reassignment in progress. Her stomach flipped. She opened her banking app, scanning for linked accounts. A subfolder she hadn't touched in over a year popped open. Inside, the deed to the cottage, the bakery, and the name listed under Recipient of Transfer Authorization, Lily Hammond, Nathan's ex-girlfriend. Her name was typed in full. The same woman who had sat in that patio chair, silent and unsmiling, while Nathan and his friends laughed at Evelyn's expense. Evelyn stared at the screen, pulse thudding in her throat. No one had called her. No one had asked. The process had already begun. It had to be Nathan. He still had access to some of her digital accounts, shared years ago when she was recovering from surgery, and he offered to help manage bills. She hadn't changed the passwords, because trust, for her, was a muscle memory. And now it had betrayed her again. Evelyn stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the tile. She paced the room once, then twice, her hands clenched into fists. She had nearly forgiven him again. She had been on the verge of calling Delilah, her lawyer, and telling her to stop the investigation, to drop the charges, to give him one more chance. Because that's what mothers do, right? But what if this time, forgiveness became permission? What if, by giving him yet another clean slate, she was writing herself out of the story entirely? This wasn't about spite anymore. It was about survival. Evelyn sat down at the table again, this time with a different purpose. She pulled out her file folder, opened the pages with trembling hands, and began drafting new instructions. Bank account lockdowns, property holds, revocation of digital access, emergency transfer protocols. She would not be erased, not this time. A knock at the front of the building startled her, just once. Soft. She paused, waiting. No second knock came. She walked quietly to the door, peered through the peephole. No one was there. But something had been left on the doorstep. A single cupcake. Chocolate. Topped with a swirl of cream. No note. Just like that party. Just like that night. Only this time, she knew what was behind the sweetness. And it wasn't love. It was guilt. And it had come too late. The next morning, Evelyn rose with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She didn't cry when she changed her passwords, didn't shake when she called the bank to freeze every account linked to her name. Her voice was calm, firm, not cold, but controlled. There was strength in knowing she had finally stopped waiting for someone else to protect her. She closed every loophole, revoked Nathan's access to anything that once had a trace of shared between them. Bills, savings, tax software, property records. Even the utility account tied to the cottage was re-registered in her name with two-step verification. The final act, Evelyn visited her attorney and signed a legal affidavit declaring sole authority over her finances and assets. She asked for recommendations to start a foundation, small, maybe symbolic, but rooted in something larger than herself. Delilah raised an eyebrow, impressed. What kind of foundation? Evelyn looked out the window before answering. One that helps people like me, seniors who gave too much, who lost too much, who don't know the law is still on their side. She wanted to call it the Second Slice Fund, a name that reminded her both of her past in the bakery and the reality that everyone deserved one more chance to claim what was theirs. Within a week, the account was opened. She deposited an initial $5,000. A drop in the bucket, perhaps, but the first drop always matters most. The news brought a strange stillness to her evenings. Evelyn found herself sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She listened to the wind rattle the porch screen, the occasional hoot of an owl in the woods beyond. No one called. No one asked for anything, and for once, she didn't feel unwanted, just untouched. Then, one Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. She almost threw it away, thinking it was more junk mail or a forgotten bill. But the handwriting stopped her. It was clean, intentional. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper and a short message written in blue ink. Dear Miss Hale, you may not remember this, but 20 years ago you helped my mother. She was new to the country, terrified, and too proud to ask for aid when her hospital bill exceeded what she could afford. You paid it, quietly, no fanfare, just slipped the nurse a check and said, "Mothers shouldn't be punished for doing their best." That act changed our lives. I'm now a licensed attorney. I specialize in elder protection law. If you ever need anything, please call. No charge. Just thank you. Grace Kim. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time. She sat in stunned silence. She did remember. A young woman, maybe in her late 30s, holding a toddler with one hand and a crumpled bill in the other, her eyes full of fear, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn had stepped in that day with a single check and a gentle smile. She never told anyone. It wasn't a story she'd kept, just a moment she let go of. Something small, something kind, and now it had come back. Not as a repayment, but as a lifeline. She called the number listed at the bottom. It rang twice before a voice answered. Grace Kim speaking. Grace, Evelyn said softly, her throat catching. This is Evelyn Hale. There was a pause, then warmth. I was hoping you'd call, Grace said. "How are you holding up?" Evelyn laughed, soft, a little broken. "Better now." They spoke for nearly an hour. Grace had read about the rising trend of financial manipulation targeting seniors, often from their own family members. She'd seen the devastation it caused. "But it's rare," she said, "to see someone fight back while staying so composed." Evelyn smiled. "It's not composure. It's years of training." Grace offered to help finalize the foundation paperwork, even expand it with additional legal resources. "You've already started something powerful," she said. "Let's make it louder." And just like that, Evelyn wasn't alone anymore. Something inside her shifted, not a full healing. Grief wasn't that polite, but a recalibration, a reminder that the world didn't just take. Sometimes it gave back. She poured herself a glass of iced tea, sat by the window, and stared at the dusk settling in like an old friend. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A child laughed. Life, in its small, relentless way, kept moving forward. She picked up her notebook again, not to write a list of regrets, but to sketch ideas for her next chapter. Workshops for seniors on digital protection, free legal clinics on power of attorney agreements, baking classes with coffee and quiet conversation for those learning to be alone. She would build something here, not out of bitterness, but out of reclaimed strength. She had paid a high price to be forgotten, but now she was building something no one could erase, not even Nathan. The folder in Evelyn's hands felt heavier than it should have. Inside was nothing more than ink on paper, forms, affidavits, witness statements. But to her, it weighed like history, like years, like silence, condensed into legal language. She sat across from Delilah and Grace in the sunlit conference room of Langford and Bell. Both women had reviewed every detail of Evelyn's case. Today was about action. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Grace asked gently, sliding the notarized documents toward her. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She traced the edge of the envelope with her finger, eyes lowered. "It's not about revenge," she said finally. "It's about making sure he doesn't get another chance to erase me." Delilah nodded in agreement. "You're not pressing criminal charges. You're filing a civil counterclaim and freezing any further financial interactions. We'll also be issuing a formal legal warning. Any attempt to contact or impersonate you, even digitally, will be prosecuted." Evelyn signed the documents without a second thought. Later that afternoon, the papers were sent via certified mail. Another copy was emailed, and one, most satisfying of all, was hand-delivered to Nathan's apartment. He didn't see it coming. 2 days passed in quiet stillness. On the third morning, Evelyn was watering the rosemary bush outside the bakery cottage when her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. "Evelyn Hale?" "Yes. This is Officer Brenner from the County Court Services. I'm calling to confirm that Mr. Nathan Hale has received the civil summons and associated cease and desist documentation." Evelyn paused. "And his response?" A short silence. "He signed for it," Officer Brenner said. "And well, he cried." Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me?" The officer's tone was professional, but not unkind. "I've served a lot of these. Usually people are angry. They shout, 'Slam doors.' Your son didn't. He read the first page, dropped into a chair, and cried. Quietly. For a while." Evelyn didn't know what to say. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "Thank you for letting me know," she said after a long pause. "Is there anything else I need to do?" "No, ma'am. You've done everything by the book. You're protected." She ended the call and stood still for a long moment. Nathan had cried, but she knew better than to mistake tears for remorse. People cry for many reasons: loss, frustration, fear. She didn't know which it was for him, maybe all three. But what she did know, with quiet certainty, was this. He had finally lost control, and that, more than anything, explained his tears. Nathan wasn't grieving a broken relationship. He was grieving the collapse of his ability to manipulate it. She imagined him reading the papers, the full itemization of every unauthorized transaction, the digital logs tracing IP addresses back to his apartment, the notarized declaration revoking all financial access, the court's formal recognition of her as an independent legal and financial entity, separate from her son. He wasn't in trouble with the police, not yet. He wasn't being sued for damages, not yet. But the wall had gone up, and he no longer had a key. Evelyn poured herself a glass of water and sat at the small table near the window. A soft breeze stirred the curtains. The world outside moved on, birds hopping along the porch rail, a neighbor walking their dog, the far-off sound of a lawnmower. She expected to feel triumphant, but she didn't. She felt level, steady, like someone who had finally finished mopping up a mess that wasn't hers. Grace called later that day to follow up. "He's already emailed," she said dryly. "Once to our office, once to yours. Nothing threatening, but emotional. The usual guilt-laced confusion. Why would she do this? I thought she loved me. She didn't have to go this far." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Did you respond?" she asked. "No," Grace said firmly. "We don't answer manipulations with empathy." Evelyn gave a small smile. "Thank you." That night she sat down and wrote Nathan a letter. Not one she would send, just one to help herself sleep. "You cried when you lost access, not when you lost me. You don't understand what you broke because you never learned what you had. I gave you everything I had to give. Now I'm keeping what's left." She folded it neatly, slipped it into a drawer, and let the words rest there, heavy, but finished. The next morning, the sky was brighter, the wind warmer. Evelyn took a walk through the neighborhood, waving at shopkeepers she hadn't spoken to in years. She bought a bouquet of yellow tulips from the corner stand. And when she returned home, she placed them by the kitchen window where the light could catch their color. There would be no press, no drama, no confrontation, just paperwork and peace. Because sometimes the strongest scream is silence signed in ink. The folder was still warm in Evelyn's hands when she stepped out of the courthouse. She had just done something most wouldn't understand, something even Grace and Delilah had tried to gently discourage. She had withdrawn the civil suit at the very last moment, not out of fear, not out of hesitation, but because deep down, Evelyn knew she didn't want to spend the next year of her life locked in a courtroom, reliving every betrayal, just to prove she had been betrayed. She already knew. And now, so did the law. What she didn't withdraw, however, was the protection. She kept every document, every affidavit, every declaration, every forensic log. She sealed it into a hardbound case, labeled it with the date, and placed it in a locked cabinet inside her newly restored office. Not as a weapon, but as a warning, a living archive, a living warning for anyone who might ever try to twist her trust again. And Evelyn had no intention of using it unless she had to. She called Grace the next morning. "It's done," she said simply. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh, not of frustration, but understanding. "Then we close the file," Grace said, "but we keep the keys." Evelyn nodded even though no one could see. She hung up and turned her attention to something else, someone else. She hadn't heard from Lily in years. Not since Nathan's early 20s when they had lived together in a cramped apartment near the college campus and fought over rent, bills, and everything in between. Evelyn had liked her in a quiet, guarded way. She had seen the girl's resilience, her kindness. But Lily had vanished from their lives not long after the relationship ended. No goodbye, no explanation, until now. Because Lily's name was on the title transfer Nathan had tried to push through, and Evelyn had questions. She found her on social media within minutes. Her profile was private, but her business page wasn't. Lily Hammond, freelance designer. The contact form was simple, professional. Evelyn typed a short message. Hi Lily, I believe your name may have been used, without your full knowledge, in a recent property transaction. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just asking if we could talk. She sent it and closed the laptop, not expecting a response. But one came within an hour. A phone number and a note. Yes, please. I think we should. They met at a small cafe 2 towns over, neutral ground. Lily looked older than Evelyn remembered, but stronger too. Her eyes were tired in a way that only mothers recognize in each other. She arrived pushing a stroller. The baby, no, toddler, was maybe 2 years old. A girl with Nathan's eyes and Lily's mouth. They sat by the window, 2 women with too much between them for polite conversation. But Evelyn didn't speak first. Lily did. I didn't know, she said quietly, about the title transfer. Not really. He told me it was something small, just a symbolic gift to make up for everything. He said it wasn't official. Evelyn slid a copy of the court documents across the table. Lily read them slowly, word by word. Her hands trembled halfway through. She placed her fingers on the name at the bottom, her own, typed into a legal document she hadn't seen before. He used me, Lily said, voice cracking. He used both of us, Evelyn replied. They sat in silence, the toddler babbling softly in her seat. Then Lily whispered, "Thank you." Evelyn blinked. For what? For not letting it go through, for showing me what he really is. I think I needed to see it in writing. Evelyn reached across the table and rested her hand on Lily's. You deserved better, she said. We both did. Lily nodded, tears in her eyes. I never told him about her, she said, glancing at her daughter. He doesn't know. I was going to. But after the things he said about you, after what I saw, I couldn't let him into her life. Evelyn swallowed hard. Good, she said. She deserves someone who shows up without strings attached. They parted without promises, but with something unspoken between them, a quiet alliance, a shared understanding forged not in friendship, but in survival. That night, Evelyn sat in the cottage alone. She looked through the cabinet where she had stored the legal file. She touched the label gently. Then she opened the drawer next to it and slipped in another folder, one that simply read, Lily. Inside it, she placed a printed picture from Lily's website, a photo of the toddler playing in the grass, face turned toward the sun. A reminder not of pain, but of what comes after. Light, not always justice, not always apology, but clarity, the kind that lets you breathe again. The smell of warm cinnamon and browned butter filled the air long before the door opened. Evelyn stood behind the counter, her apron lightly dusted with flour, a wooden spoon resting in her hand. Sunlight streamed through the front windows of the newly reopened bakery, catching on the polished brass lettering above the door. No recipe for love. The name had stirred polite curiosity around town. Some thought it poetic, others cryptic. A few assumed it was romantic, but to Evelyn, it meant something quieter, more personal. Love, she had learned, especially a mother's love, didn't follow instructions. It couldn't be measured in cups or teaspoons. It didn't always rise evenly. Sometimes it curdled, sometimes it burned, and yet people kept making it. She opened the bakery with no fanfare, no grand opening, just a handwritten chalkboard outside the door, fresh scones, hot coffee. Come in, sit a while. At first, a few locals wandered in, drawn by the smell. Then more came, mostly women. Women with silver in their hair and tired smiles. Women who carried purses full of tissues and stories they only told when no one asked. They didn't know Evelyn's story. She never offered it. Instead, she served. She poured coffee, sliced cake, wrapped fresh loaves of bread in brown paper with string. She listened. That became the real magic of no recipe for love. Not the pastries, though they were excellent, but the space. There was something about the way Evelyn moved behind the counter. Quiet, steady, unapologetically calm. It told others, you're safe here. You're not the only one. You're not wrong to hurt. A small group began forming on Tuesdays, unofficial, unannounced. They brought knitting needles, old photo albums, sometimes tears. They didn't call it therapy, just coffee with Evelyn. One woman, June, came in after her son forgot her birthday for the third year in a row. She ate half a blueberry muffin and said nothing until the last bite. "He used to bring me daisies," she said finally. "Little white ones he picked on the walk home from school. Now he texts me, 'Busy. Call later.'" Evelyn offered no advice. She simply refilled June's cup and placed a daisy in a bud vase the next morning before the group arrived. Another woman, Margaret, confessed that her daughter had stopped inviting her for holidays since she refused to update her political views. "I gave her life," she said, shaking. "She gave me a block button." Evelyn handed her a slice of lemon tart. "Bittersweet," she said with a small smile. The women didn't ask Evelyn why she started the bakery again. They assumed it was nostalgia or a hobby. None of them knew the deeper truth. The oven had stayed cold for almost a decade. Evelyn hadn't baked since Nathan moved out. She had packed away every pan, every recipe card, even her mother's cast iron loaf tins. But after everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the unraveling, she realized she needed something she could still shape with her own hands, something she could give without losing herself. Baking was never about perfection for her. It was about presence. One morning, Evelyn found a small note folded and slipped under the bakery door. "I heard about your shop from a friend. My son says I'm too sensitive. I think I'm just not numb yet. Do you have room for one more?" It wasn't signed, but Evelyn wrote back on the chalkboard the next day. "There's always a seat. No RSVP required. Come as you are." The space became more than a bakery. It became a gathering of ghosts, not the kind that haunt, but the kind that whisper, "You're not alone. You're not crazy. You mattered." Evelyn kept her story close, like a recipe written on the inside of a cabinet door, faded, private, still known by heart. Sometimes, she'd watch the door open and wonder if Nathan would ever walk through it. Not to say sorry, just to see. But he never came. And that too became part of her peace. She didn't need his apology to be whole again. She just needed to stop waiting for it. So she baked, and she listened, and she lived, not out of spite, but out of survival. The kind that rises, warm and slow, like bread in a quiet oven. It started with a message on the bakery's website. The sender was someone named Amelia Tran, a young associate from a local legal advocacy group. Her tone was warm, professional, curious. "Ms. Hale, several of our team members have visited your bakery and been deeply moved, not just by your food, but by the space you've created. We're currently producing a short feature on community-led healing spaces for women, especially older women facing familial estrangement and financial manipulation. We'd love to include you, even just your voice or a quote. You don't have to appear on camera." Evelyn read the email 3 times, then closed her laptop. It was flattering, yes, even heartwarming. But it was also something else, exposing. She had spent so long retreating, reclaiming, rebuilding, quietly, letting flour and sugar speak for her, letting the rising and cooling of dough become her only statement. Did she really want to be a symbol now? But the email didn't ask for a speech, just a presence. And that she could offer. 2 days later, Amelia arrived at the bakery. She was in her late 20s, bright-eyed, compassionate, with the kind of presence that made people speak openly. She ordered a slice of peach pie and sat in the corner, watching the small Tuesday group slowly gather, knit, laugh, and pass around banana bread. When Evelyn came to refill her coffee, Amelia stood. "I won't push," she said softly, "but I do think people need to know that places like this exist." Evelyn nodded. "People need the space, not the story." Amelia smiled. "What if we told both, without the spotlight?" Later that week, the group returned. This time, a photographer accompanied Amelia. She was quiet, respectful, snapping shots of flour-dusted counters, freshly plated pastries, and most notably, Evelyn's hands. Strong, veined, worn with time. They caught her mid-pour, mid-fold, mid-garnish. No faces, no names. Just hands that had spent decades giving, cleaning, serving, now creating. The final photo was published in the community paper under the title, "The Quiet Table, Where Women Heal Over Coffee and Cake." The caption read, "No interview, no name, just one request. Tell them I'm still here, just not for who I was." The bakery saw a trickle of new faces the following week. Not many, but just enough. Some came out of curiosity. Most came with stories of their own. Then one morning, the bell above the bakery door jingled, and Evelyn looked up to see a face she hadn't expected, but recognized instantly. Lily. She looked tired, but composed. Her daughter, maybe 3 now, clung to her leg, peeking out shyly from behind a tiny purple coat. Evelyn stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Lily smiled, a little nervous. "We were nearby. I thought maybe she'd like something sweet." The girl tugged at her mother's coat, then looked up at Evelyn. "Mommy said you're the only grown-up who ever protected her," she said, her voice small and serious. Evelyn froze. She knelt slowly, bringing herself eye level with the child. "Is that so?" The girl nodded solemnly. "She said you stopped a bad thing from happening." Evelyn looked at Lily. Their eyes met. No blame, no shame, just quiet acknowledgement. "Would you like to help me frost a cookie?" Evelyn asked the little one. A spark lit up the girl's eyes, and she turned to her mother for permission. Lily nodded. They spent the next 10 minutes behind the counter, Evelyn guiding small hands over swirls of icing and colorful sprinkles. The child laughed, a light musical sound that filled every corner of the bakery. When they finished, Lily handed Evelyn a folded envelope. "Just a card," she said, "no pressure." After they left, Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside was a simple drawing, crayon hearts, stick figures, the words, "Thank you for saving my mom." So on the back, Lily had written, "You gave me back more than safety. You gave me clarity, and a daughter who'll never have to wonder what a real protector looks like." Evelyn folded the note carefully and placed it in the same drawer that held the copy of Nathan's Cease and Desist. 2 stories. 2 outcomes. 1 choice she'd never regret. She stood at the counter, watching the front door close behind Lily and her daughter. Then she turned, walked back to the oven, and pulled out the next batch of cookies. They weren't for Nathan. They never had been. This oven, the warmth it gave, the love it baked into every crust and crumb, was for those who stayed, those who returned, and those who still believed that love didn't need a recipe, just a place to rise. The seasons turned quietly in Evelyn's life. Spring softened into summer, then burned gently into autumn. Leaves painted the sidewalks in amber and rust, and the bakery began to smell more of nutmeg and cloves than citrus and strawberries. By winter, the Tuesday group had grown from 6 to 12. A book club had spontaneously formed over coffee and pumpkin bread. On Fridays, Evelyn taught small baking workshops for retired teachers and nurses who needed something to keep their hands busy and hearts full. She still didn't speak of Nathan, not in detail, not with names. But sometimes, when a story reached too close to the bone, a daughter's silence, a son's anger, a birthday forgotten, she would simply nod, place a second cookie on the plate, and say, "You're not alone." One morning, nearly a year to the day since she'd walked away from the house where everything had come undone, Evelyn opened her mailbox and found a small envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. It was clean, careful. No return address, no stamp of drama. She stood in the quiet of her cottage kitchen, the kettle hissing softly behind her, and opened the letter with steady fingers. "Mom, I've spent the past year trying to outrun myself, but I can't. And I think it's time I stopped pretending I didn't break something that mattered. I said things I didn't mean. I did things I can't take back. But I remember who you were when I needed you. Always there. Always forgiving. Always more than I deserved. I don't expect anything, but if you're willing, could you come home? Or let me come to you? I want to try again. Love, Nathan. Evelyn read it once, then again, and then slowly she folded it and placed it back into the envelope. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't write back. Instead, she set the letter in a drawer alongside the others, the folded thank you notes from the women at the bakery, the drawings from Lily's daughter, the article clippings from the feature in the community paper, pieces of a life rebuilt. That day, Evelyn baked a batch of lemon shortbread and wrote a new recipe card, something old and familiar, something comforting. She did not call Nathan, and she did not expect to hear from him again. But a few weeks later, on a Saturday morning thick with the scent of orange scones and warming ovens, the front door of the bakery opened with the quiet chime of the bell. Evelyn looked up from behind the counter. Nathan stood there, older, thinner, his posture softer than she remembered. In his hands, a small cloth-wrapped bundle. He didn't speak at first, neither did she. He walked forward slowly, as if approaching a fragile animal. "I know I shouldn't have come without calling," he said, voice low, "but I didn't know how else to do this." Evelyn kept her hands on the countertop. "You're here," she said. "That's doing something." He nodded, swallowed. "I brought something." He placed the bundle on the counter, unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay the gold pocket watch, her father's, the same one she'd had restored, the same one she had given him once, believing it meant connection, the same one he had sold. "I found it," Nathan said. "Tracked it down through the pawn shop records, paid double what I sold it for. I didn't think I'd get it back, but here it is." His eyes brimmed, but he blinked quickly, as if ashamed of the emotion. "I thought, maybe it belongs here, not with me." Evelyn didn't touch it. She didn't ask questions. She didn't ask why now, why this, why he thought it might be enough. Instead, she looked at her son. Really looked. Past the tiredness, past the guilt, past the soft tremble in his jaw. There was no joy, no anger, just quiet recognition. "You know," she said softly, "when I gave you that watch, I wasn't giving you gold. I was giving you history. I was giving you the part of me I never showed anyone else, the part I thought you'd carry forward." Nathan nodded, voice almost breaking. "I didn't understand that, not until I lost it." Evelyn reached for a clean napkin and wrapped the watch again. She didn't hand it back. She placed it gently on the shelf behind her, next to the recipe books and the photo of her mother kneading dough with tired hands. "It belongs there," she said, "with the things I remember, not the things I regret." Nathan didn't argue. He looked around the bakery, the humming warmth, the low conversation, the soft clinking of plates. His eyes landed on the table near the window, where June and Margaret sat with fresh slices of apple cake. "This place," he said quietly. "You really built it again." Evelyn nodded. "Yes, I did." There was a long pause. "Can I come by sometime? Not for anything. Just maybe a coffee?" Evelyn tilted her head. "Are you asking for a seat as a customer or as a son?" He looked down. "I don't know yet." She didn't smile, but she didn't send him away. "There's space," she said, "but you'll need to wait your turn. People come here to heal, not to explain." Nathan nodded, turned slowly, and walked toward the door. Just before he stepped out, he glanced back. "Happy birthday," he said quietly. Evelyn blinked. She hadn't realized what day it was, March 2nd, her birthday. She watched the door close, and for the first time in years, she didn't wish anyone would walk back in. Evelyn didn't reach for the watch. Even after Nathan laid it on the counter, unwrapped it with reverence, and let the gold glint in the bakery's soft light, she didn't touch it. She simply looked at it, then at him, He waited, hopeful. But she only smiled. Not bitterly, not triumphantly, just gently, with something close to kindness and far from sentimentality. "I don't need it," she said. Nathan blinked, caught off guard. "It's yours." Evelyn shook her head slowly. No, it was never about the metal or the heirloom. That watch held memories, yes, but they live here. She tapped her temple. "Not there. I don't need it to remember who your grandfather was, or who your father was, or who I was when I loved them." She let the words rest between them like a final page. Nathan swallowed. I thought maybe it could mean something again." "It does mean something," Evelyn replied. "It means you found your way to something you once threw away. That matters. But it doesn't mean I need to take it back to make it whole." He stared at the watch for a long time, then wrapped it back up with care. Not insulted, not defeated, just quieter, smaller. She walked him to the door. As he opened it, the chime above gave its usual friendly ring. The cold morning air swept in gently, March wind carrying the faintest trace of spring. He turned to say something else, but stopped himself. Instead, he gave her a small, uncertain nod and turned to leave. But he didn't get far. A small blur darted out from one of the side tables, sneakers squeaking against the floorboards. "Wait!" Both Evelyn and Nathan turned at once. It was Lily's daughter, her cheeks flushed, curls bouncing as she ran. She stopped short in front of Evelyn, clutching a half-colored page from the craft corner. "Bye, Evelyn!" she said breathlessly, grinning wide. "Myla sin na ciao!" Evelyn's eyebrows lifted. "Is that so?" The little girl nodded eagerly, shoving the drawing into Evelyn's hands. It was a crayon cake with uneven candles and a shaky 5 drawn in the middle. Her name, Emmy, was scrawled at the bottom. "Mommy says I can pick who makes my cake," Emmy said proudly, eyes wide with hope. Can you do it? Please?" Time stilled. Nathan stood frozen, watching his daughter, embrace the woman he once told to disappear. Evelyn bent down, her voice soft and steady. "What kind of cake do you like?" Emmy whispered like it was a secret. "Strawberry, with pink flowers and sprinkles, lots." Evelyn tapped her chin thoughtfully. "I think I can make that happen." Emmy squealed, throwing her arms around Evelyn's waist in a tight, honest hug. "And Evelyn?" She hugged back, fully, naturally, without thinking. The kind of hug that doesn't ask for history or blood or obligation, just presence. Nathan watched them, unmoving. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. Evelyn had become mom again, not to him, but to someone who looked up at her with nothing but trust. And somehow, that mattered more. When Emmy pulled back, Evelyn brushed a curl from her face. "You better come early tomorrow," she said. "Pink flowers take time." Emmy nodded seriously and skipped off, returning to her coloring with renewed energy. Nathan lingered for a second longer. There was something in his eyes, not jealousy, not resentment, just understanding. He stepped outside, holding the wrapped watch close, and the door swung shut behind him. The bakery was warm again, buzzing, alive. But Evelyn stood in stillness, one hand on the counter, the other brushing against the spot where a little girl's arms had wrapped around her. She didn't need a bloodline to validate her worth. She didn't need a courtroom to define her justice. She didn't need an apology to reclaim her dignity. She had flour on her sleeves, a list of cupcake orders scribbled on the back of a napkin, and a little girl waiting for a cake. And somehow, that was more than enough. She moved to the prep counter and pulled down her mixing bowl, humming softly as she sifted flour, cracked eggs, and measured out sugar. Her hands moved with instinct, memory, and care. Each movement said, "I am still here, I am still good, and I am still me." No, she didn't get the ending most mothers long for. There was no hug from Nathan, no tearful embrace, no promises to change, no long-lost closeness restored. But what she got was better. She got to be whole again, in her way, in her space, for someone new. The next day, when Emmy arrived, the cake was already boxed, tied with a pink ribbon and a daisy on top. Strawberry, pink flowers, and extra sprinkles, Evelyn said with a wink. Emmy's eyes lit up. It's perfect. And it was. Because it wasn't just a cake, it was a symbol of love remade, of legacy passed, not through blood, but through kindness, of a woman who had been told to disappear and chose instead to rise.